Rogel, and I'm the Vice President of Products and Marketing for DecisionWise. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Tracy Maylett.
Hi, Charles.
Tracy is one of the co-authors of the book, The Employee Experience: How to Attract Talent, Retain Top Performers, and Drive Results. Today, we're going to be talking about Chapter 4 of the book, which is titled An Intentional Framework. And so, Tracy, as I struggled to even pronounce the title, can you help us out by explaining what the title means?
Sure. That title took a lot of thought behind it. It actually did. And the reason that is because what we wanted to convey was the idea that an employee experience, if left alone, will shape itself. Mm-hmm. Meaning that if your organization is not deliberate about creating what the type of experience it wants, it will create itself. So the objective here is to make that experience intentional, make that framework intentional in the way you decide to create that.
So you're kind of creating the environment you want your employees to operate in.
Exactly right. So if you do not create it, it will create itself. That's the purpose of this chapter.
And you give a good example or a good case study by talking about the recent changes at the company called Gravity Payments,
Sure,
where the CEO decided to pay everyone the same amount of $70,000 a year.
Exactly right. So let's refer back. This was announced a year or so ago, right?
Yeah.
So we have CEO Dan Price of Gravity Payments, who went to his team and basically said, everyone in this company, there will be a minimum of a $70,000 minimum wage. So
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad at all, right? So, of course, the employees were very excited about this, and it spurred a lot of challenge from the media. In fact, Rush Limbaugh said something to the effect that's pure adulterated socialism or something along those lines. But basically gained a lot of popular press and also gained a lot of academic press. It was an interesting psychological experiment in what's going on in the organization. So was it publicity? Was it a publicity stunt? Maybe. We don't know necessarily, but what we do know is that pay is not a way to perk your way to performance, right?
Yeah.
So from an organizational psychology standpoint, pay does not necessarily create better performance in most occasions.
Yeah.
So for that to take place, not necessarily. That's not the good reason. But what it does say that's very interesting is Price did something very smart. He intentionally shaped the employee experience. He said, rather than letting that experience shape itself, I, as the owner of this company, as the leader of this company, want to be in charge of creating an experience that I want to create.
Yeah.
And his $70,000 was a way to do that. It was less about the $70,000 than it was about creating that experience that he chose to create.
Because that triggered a whole bunch of other things.
Sure. Well, and not all those positive from an employee standpoint. You had the employees who had been there for years who were making $70,000, and all of a sudden you have a new person that's come on board without skills that's making the same amount of money. Mm-hmm. So there are certainly some negatives and positives, but the interesting story out of this is, again, Price chose to shape that experience rather than letting that experience shape itself.
So as the CEO, it seems like it's pretty easy to shape the employee experience, especially with a decision like that. But how much influence do other managers, leaders, or even employees have in shaping the employee experience?
Okay, so in the book we break this down by certain levels, right? Mm-hmm. So an entrepreneur may have a different level of ability to shape that experience than would a frontline supervisor.
Yeah.
So you have your entrepreneurs and founders, and those are the people who launch the organizations, and they're in a unique position to set the values from the very beginning. So that means you have a privilege of intentionally shaping the beliefs about the way. This is what Gravity Payments did. Yeah. He said, I am an entrepreneur, and I'm going to shape whatever that experience looks like. So at that level, you have a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
You also have the next level down, which is the senior executives. And these are the executives who create the operating environment that supports your beliefs or detracts from it. So if you have a certain set of beliefs about what that experience should be, their day-to-day practices either encourage that or detract from that experience. Then you have your vice president or your senior management level. These folks see things from the 30,000 feet level, and their focus tends to be on keeping their fingers on the pulse of the organization. Mm-hmm. So at that level, we're monitoring what that experience is. But the folks who actually have the most impact on this it's not the founder. The founder can set the values, etc., but it's the managers and supervisors, those who interact with the employees and the customers individually on a day-to-day basis. They have the ability to shape that experience for the individual.
Because they're the ones really implementing the framework kind of handed to them and making sure that it gets ingrained in what goes on in the organization.
They translate. Mm-hmm. They translate the organizational values into day-to-day practices.
Now, when you talk about this and the different roles people have, you also talk about the way employees and leaders look at the employee experience in the organization. And you kind of describe it as 3 different lenses.
Sure. Yeah, we refer to this as the lenses. So we have 3 different lenses by which we can look at the employee experience. The first one is what's called the organizational lens. The second one is the employee lens. And the third one is the leadership or leader lens. Mm-hmm. So the organizational lens, if you picture a pair of glasses, you have lenses on the front of the glasses, you see what the glasses convey, right? Yeah. The light that comes through. So from an organizational perspective, if I put on my organizational glasses, I may see what happens from an organization standpoint. So for example, I may see a need to do something as an organization because of finances or mm-hmm. because I see something coming down the road. I'm looking at the entire organization. The employee is not looking through the organizational lenses. The employee looks through the employee lens.
Right.
How does
this for me?
Yeah, exactly right. How does this impact me? Yeah, I understand that we're going into this market, but what does that mean for my Christmas bonus coming up?
Yeah.
I understand that the organization, going back to an example we used in a previous podcast, the concept of giving bonuses and the idea that I see my bonus as how it impacts me. But the organization looks at that and says, but there's a reason behind it from an organizational standpoint. So that's the employee lens. How do I as an employee see things? What we're encouraging is what we refer to as the leadership lens. This is the ability to take a multiscopic approach, to look at both the organizational lens and the employee lens at the same time.
Okay.
To be able to ask the question, yes, this is where the organization needs to go. Now, how will the employee perceive that?
Yeah.
So most leaders don't look through those lenses. They're either looking through their organization lens or their own personal employee lens rather than the leadership lens.
Yeah, they make a decision and then say, well, live with it. This is where we're going.
That's exactly
and if you don't like it, there's the door.
That's exactly it. So the reason this fits into this chapter is the idea that in order to shape that experience, we have to be able to look at the experience through other lenses.
Yeah.
And see how are employees viewing this. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It matters whether or not the employees perceive this as being right or wrong, right? How it impacts them.
So this chapter kind of launches into additional chapters that talk about this idea of a contract, that every relationship that we have, whether it be personal or a work relationship or employment, is essentially a contract or a set of contracts.
Exactly right. And we, in subsequent chapters, we'll talk a lot more about each one of the contracts. There are actually 3 main contracts that form the main contract,
yeah.
right? So we have the brand contract, we have the transactional contract, and the psychological contract. And we spend further chapters talking a lot more about these. But basically, the definition of the contract is this. The contract is the totality of explicit and implicit expectations that define the operating rules of the relationship. And every relationship has a contract. You and I are friends. You and I have a contract. I may work for an organization. I have a contract with that organization. Mm-hmm. I have a contract with my wife. I have a contract with my kids.
Whether it's written or not.
Whether it's written or not, that contract exists. And the degree to which our expectations are going to be met is the degree to which that the terms of those contracts are perceived as being honored on both parts.
Okay. Well, Tracy, I want to thank you for the brief overview of Chapter 4 of the book, The Employee Experience. We just talked about building an intentional framework. You can get a copy of the book at Amazon or any other book reseller. The Employee Experience, How to Attract Talent, Retain Top Performers, and Drive Results is published by Wiley. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Charles.